I didn't expect to lose my breath the moment I stepped out of my truck, but that's exactly what happened because standing where my uncle used to fish every single dawn of my life was a 4-story glass mansion that didn't belong there, and the woman who built it was smiling at me while calling the police, telling them I was trespassing on her HOA property. I stood there frozen for a second, the wind coming off the lake cold against my face, staring at concrete and steel where there should have been water pine trees and silence. And in that moment I realized something had gone horribly wrong with the land my family had protected for more than 70 years. My name is Owen Mercer, and until that day I thought inheriting my uncle's ranch would be simple. Emotional, sure. Heavy, definitely. But simple. 900 acres in Montana, untouched wilderness wrapped around a 200-acre lakeland my grandfather bought in 1952 with railroad money. Land my Uncle Graham spent his entire life defending from developers who waved checks in his face like they were doing him a favor. He always said, land wasn't something you owned, it was something you borrowed from the next generation. I grew up believing that. I was 15 when my parents died in a winter crash outside Billings, and Graham didn't hesitate for a second. He took me in, taught me how to read rock layers, how to understand water flow, how glaciers carved valleys long before people ever thought they could own them. Those summers turned me into a geologist, someone who trusted maps, measurements, and evidence more than smooth talk. Graham died quietly in his sleep heart attack, 78 years old, alone in the cabin he'd lived in for half a century. The funeral was small, a few neighbors, no speeches, just people who knew what kind of man he was. The lawyer handed me the will and everything went to me. The land, the house, the mineral rights, the water rights. And then there was a letter handwritten waiting for me. He told me the documents were in the safe. He told me people would test me. He told me not to give up what was rightfully mine. I didn't understand why he sounded worried until I came back. The ranch looked the same when I unlocked the old gate. Rusted hinges, the sign still crooked. Silver Lake Ranch, private property, no trespassing. The house smelled like coffee and dust. His boots were still by the door. I opened the safe with my mother's birthday and pulled out the documents, yellow deeds, tax record surveys dating back decades. And buried among them were letters I'd never seen before. Formal notices, legal threats, return to sender. Someone had been surveying the eastern boundary. Someone had been warned. Someone had kept going anyway. That's when I climbed the hill behind the house and saw it. Glass reflecting sunlight like a mirror. A mansion, and behind it roads, fences, manicured lawns. A development spreading across land that should have been empty. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a fence moved a few feet. This was a community, built deep inside my property. I walked down toward the lake with my maps and GPS, trying to stay calm, telling myself there had to be an explanation. But the numbers didn't lie. The original stone boundary markers from the 1950s were exactly where they were supposed to be. And then I found the orange plastic stakes, brand new, bright, wrong, pushed hundreds of meters west, carving 15 acres straight out of my land, right where the lake access was, the most valuable part. There was a sign at the road, Lakeview Estates, private community, managed by Lakeview HOA. When I reached the gate, a guard stepped out, radio on his belt, telling me I needed to leave. I told him my name, told him this was my land. He didn't even blink. He reached for his radio and said if I didn't leave, he'd call the police. And before I could argue, a black SUV rolled up behind him. That's when I met Vivian Ashford. She stepped out like she owned the place, late 50s, perfect hair, expensive clothes, the kind of smile that looks friendly until you realize it's a warning. She introduced herself as the HOA president and asked if there was a problem. I told her exactly what the problem was, that her development was built on my family's land, that her survey markers were fake. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't get emotional. She smiled and told me everything was legal, that the county approved it, and that if I believed otherwise, I should talk to a lawyer. Then she said the words that almost made me laugh from the sheer audacity of them. She told me I was trespassing on private HOA property and needed to leave immediately. For just a second, I doubted myself. Just a flicker. Because when someone speaks with that much confidence backed by guards and gates and money, it messes with your head. I left, but I promised her it wasn't over. The next few days were rough. I called a lawyer, Lydia Kemp, and she didn't sugarcoat anything. She told me this was going to be expensive. She told me the HOA had permits. She told me if I was wrong I could lose everything. And then I went online and saw what Vivian was doing. Community posts calling me a scammer, a lunatic, a man harassing homeowners, people praising her leadership saying she'd donated to schools, hospitals, charities. I was the outsider, the troublemaker. That night alone at the cabin surrounded by Graham's things, I seriously thought about walking away, selling the land, letting them have it, because fighting an HOA backed by the county felt impossible. I stared at the letter Graham wrote me and wondered if I was being stubborn, if I was wrong, if maybe he was confused near the end. But then I pulled out the surveys again, and the GPS data, and the tax records showing uninterrupted ownership for 73 years. And the doubt faded. Facts don't bend because someone smiles confidently. Land doesn't move just because money wants it to. I hired an independent surveyor with 40 years of experience. His report was devastating. The mansion sat over 200 meters inside my property. 15 houses crossed the boundary. The fake stakes were deliberately placed to steal exactly 15.2 acres. Fraud, not a mistake. Then things got darker. The surveying company that placed the fake markers owned by Vivian's husband. The county official who approved the permits in record time bought a house in the development with cash right after. Bank records showed payments moving like clockwork. This wasn't just an HOA dispute. It was corruption. When we filed the lawsuit, they countered with threats, millions in damages, accusations of harassment. They tried to bury me. And for a moment, it worked. I couldn't sleep. Every dollar I spent felt like jumping deeper into a hole. I asked myself again if I should stop. And then Vivian's son reached out. We met in a coffee shop. He looked exhausted, guilty. He told me he designed the mansion, that his mother told him the land was legally purchased. And when he started asking questions, she shut him down. So he went through her files. And what he found destroyed her story. Emails admitting the land wasn't purchased. Notes about waiting until my uncle gave up or died. Plans to ignore objections. He handed them over and said he'd testify. That was the moment I stopped feeling alone. The HOA meeting was packed. Residents angry, scared, confused. Vivian tried to control the room, dismiss everything as lies. And then we showed the evidence, the maps, the money, her own words on the screen. And the room changed. You could feel it. People realizing their homes were built on stolen land. When her son stood up and called her out in front of everyone, something broke. The vote happened fast. 42 hands raised. Vivian was removed as HOA president on the spot. The judge didn't take long either. The ruling was clear: fraud, trespass, unjust enrichment. The HOA lost. Vivian lost. The permits were invalid. The case was referred for criminal investigation. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I just stood there exhausted, thinking about Graham, hoping he knew I finished what he started. The lesson is simple. Power doesn't decide who's right. Evidence does.